Welcome again from me, Dave Coates. This is the second in a series of sessions on forecasting. As with the first session on forecasting, the word notes on Learn provide lots of detail and the PowerPoint slides provide an outline. Again, you may choose to use the PowerPoint slides to structure your own notes. The first session introduced the management of the forecasting process. This second session will cover methods of forecasting, remembering the timescale, monitoring the forecasting costs. The plan is for me to do a proper lecture in person in the classroom for the third session, covering methods of monitoring forecasting accuracy. But before starting on methods of forecasting, it is worth reflecting on some terms defined by the IGD, the Institute of Grocery Distribution. So again, the sense this is important in retailing because this is coming from the Institute of Grocery Distribution, to whom people like Tesco, Sainsbury, Nescafe, Kellogg's belong. They would talk about demand forecasting, simply using past sales data, demand planning, which adds in considerations about capacity constraints, and demand management, adding in how variations in the marketing mix might occur to bring about some optimized results, for example, maximizing profit. In addition, consultancies and software companies have come up with their own terms. Two important terms are demand sensing and demand control. There are some details on each of these in the word notes on Learn, and you should be familiar with the differences between all of these terms. As you read through the word notes on Learn, you will see that there are three broad categories of methods of forecasting. Firstly, there are subjective methods, where people are simply asked for their views. Using last session's abbreviations, these might include WMW and PFA forecasts. There are spaces in the word notes for you to reflect on the possible advantages and disadvantages of the methods highlighted in the word notes. Again, you might like to discuss your reflections in your coursework groups. Secondly, there are simple quantitative methods, and these methods are often used for short-term forecasts where lots, possibly millions, of forecasts are needed, particularly each day. You will not be expected to do the arithmetic for any of these methods in the exam, but you should again recognise the advantages and disadvantages. Thirdly, there are sophisticated quantitative methods, and these are discussed in detail in the business forecasting option. Again, you will not be expected to do the arithmetic for any of these methods in the exam, but you should recognise their advantages and disadvantages. Following on from the methods of forecasting, the word notes on Learn consider the issues raised by different timescales. As highlighted in the PowerPoint slides on Learn, you are likely to find it helpful to think of a fast-moving consumer good, FMCG, and reflect on what might cause changes to the sales of that FMCG in the next few days, in the short term, in the next few months, in the medium term, in the next few years in the long term. Having remembered the timescale, it should then be clear that forecasting in the short term will be different to forecasting in the medium term, and will again be different to forecasting in the long term. The word notes on Learn include some thoughts on how forecasts over each of these timescales might be improved. There is a big reality, though, that long-term forecasting is extremely difficult. As an example of the different timescales, you could also think of Woolworths, the chain famous for pick and mix, but which no longer exists. Woolworths were good at forecasting in the short term for replenishing the stores on a day-by-day basis. Woolworths were good at forecasting in the medium term and making sure they had lots of toys at Christmas and that they had lots of chocolate eggs at Easter. However, they were very poor at forecasting how the whole market was going in the long term and the way in which supermarkets and the internet would take whole sections of their market away from them. One simple example is that Woolworths used to be a major retailer of music and videos. That market has changed hugely over your lifetimes. Finally, monitoring the costs of forecasting. Companies are often good at monitoring the costs of the people directly involved in forecasting, for example, counting up their salaries. However, there are also costs associated with inaccurate forecasts. Operations costs, marketing costs, and customer satisfaction costs. The word notes on Learn again provide some details of each of these. Finally, all of this leads to one of the big recent ideas in forecasting, namely FVA, Forecast Value Added. FVA asks the fundamental question, does X, perhaps that's a person, perhaps that's a process, does X actually improve my forecasts? And sadly, too often the answer is that X, person or process, has a negative FVA. In other words, X makes the forecast worse. One easy and obvious example of that is managers tweaking the forecasts because they want it to give a political message. It becomes a target. By letting the manager tweak the forecast, we make the forecast more about wish fulfillment and its accuracy goes down. The third section on forecasting, about monitoring forecast accuracy, I will do in person because there is more number work there.